begin today by stating clearly and unequivocally that I support the fundamental objectives of Bill C-71 as noted by Minister Goodale in the other place, to prioritize public safety and effective police work while treating law-abiding firearms owners and businesses fairly and reasonably. The problem I have with this bill is that it does not achieve those objectives. It does not increase public safety, does not facilitate effective police work, and certainly does not treat law-abiding firearms owners and businesses fairly and reasonably. Instead, the committee found that the bill diminishes public safety by allocating precious and limited resources to time-wasting bureaucratic exercises. It decreases the effectiveness of police work by increasing the bureaucratic burden. It adds no useful tools for the prevention, enforcement, investigation, or conviction of criminal activities. It threatens law-abiding gun owners with criminal sanctions for actions which have no relevance to public safety. And it provides a statutory basis to confiscate the property of Canadians with no provision for reimbursement. The committee began its hearings on February 18th and met on 6 occasions. All but 2 of these meetings lasted between 6 and 8 hours. In total, we sat for more than 30 hours and heard from 81 witnesses representing all sides of the issue, including 2 cabinet ministers. Whether or not one agrees with the committee's report, the committee did an excellent job examining the bill, and our approach was reflective of collegiality that is not often seen in this chamber. In fact, the amendments which were made to the bill were only possible because they were supported across caucus lines. This included Conservatives, ISG, Independent, and Independent Liberal senators. The changes were not driven by partisanship, but by a genuine desire to minimize the bill's harm while maximizing its usefulness. Senators, we're all aware that if the government doesn't like the amendments that have been made in committee, then it can take them out. It has the numbers in the other place, and if it believes that it has the electoral mandate to punish gun owners while giving gangs and murderers a pass, then it can do just that and face the consequences in October. However, for this chamber to repudiate the work of one of its committees is unprecedented, except for one condition. And that, colleagues, is when the government's majority in the Senate acts out of partisan interest to protect the government of the day. Senator Gold gave us a couple of examples where committee reports were rejected by this chamber. Bill C-36, an act respecting the safety of consumer products, and Bill C-25, an act to amend the criminal code respecting time spent in pre-sentencing custody. But colleagues, here's the problem with these examples. Bill C-36 was before this House in 2010 and C-25 in 2009. In other words, the committee reports noted by Senator Gold were rejected by this chamber only because the government of the day had a majority in this chamber. These are 2 perfectly acceptable examples of government exercising the power of its majority in the Senate to steer legislation in the direction it wants to go in order to protect its partisan interests. So, colleagues, if members opposite want to admit that they are in fact Justin Trudeau Liberal senators, then we on this side will acknowledge that they have the right to defeat this report. But if you continue to strut about in self-righteous indignation, insisting that you must defeat this report to save the country and this chamber from ruin, then for heaven's sake spare us the pretentious charade about how independent and nonpartisan you are. I find the duplicity galling, and I suspect there are only about 58 people in the
Excuse me, Senator Platt. Senator Lankin, point of order.
Yes. Speaker, we listen often to aspersions cast about the intentions of senators, honourable senators in this chamber. I don't believe that's appropriate, but I listen to it day after day after day. Right now, comments like duplicitous and other comments that have been made seem to me to start to stray over the line of sharp and taxing language, which is within our rules. And I would ask you, at the very least, to caution senators at this time of year as we go forward and there are more and more tensions. It's not helpful to our working environment, and more to the point, it may actually be a violation of the rules. Thank you.
Senator Platt, Senator Lankin raises a good point with respect to taxing comments. The word duplicitous in and of itself, it's not a taxing word. However, if it's applied to individuals, and particularly members of the chamber, then it is skating very close to the line. So I'd ask that words like that not be used in debate. Senator Platt.
Well, thank you. Since that was the only time I was using that in my speech, I think I'll be okay. As I was going to say, I suspect that there are only about 58 people in the whole country who believe this independent nonsense, and you'll find them all right here in this chamber. Having been involved in politics for a lifetime, and having been present in this chamber for almost 10 years, I've heard a lot of politically motivated speeches. But only within the last 3 years have I begun to hear politically motivated speeches given by speakers who insist that they are not politically motivated. Just the other day, a so-called independent senator stood up to speak to the committee's amendments on Bill C-71, and she said, "I fear that for some, the motivation behind the amendments might have been political rather than societal." This was a senator who was appointed by a Liberal Prime Minister after careful vetting through the party's database known as the Liberal List. The Prime Minister's office has admitted that at least 1/3 of ISG senators appointed by Mr. Trudeau have a history of donations and support either to or of the Liberal Party. Colleagues, I do not have a problem with the Prime Minister appointing senators to this chamber based on their political partisan affiliations. What I do have a problem with is dishonesty and hypocrisy. In fact, I wasn't accusing, I was saying I had a problem with it. In fact, senators opposite are so jaded that when a Conservative senator speaks, they immediately assume that whatever is coming out of their mouth is politically motivated rhetoric. They don't even listen to what is being said. Senator, please listen to this. We had a perfect example of this last week. I was speaking on my S&C Lavalin motion and said the following. There was evidence of an attempt to politically interfere with the justice system in its work on the criminal trial that has been described by some as the most important and serious prosecution of corporate corruption in modern Canadian history. As I said those words, an ISG senator from the other side scoffed and ridiculed the remarks as mere partisan exaggeration. Completely unaware, I suppose, that I was quoting a former Liberal cabinet minister, Jane Philpott. Colleagues, at least the independent Liberals in this chamber are honest about their ideological and partisan affiliations. The ISG senators, on the other hand, are intent on portraying themselves as politically pure, and this side has poisoned partisanship. But they have lost any real impartiality on the issues. Their only objective is to defend the illusion of their independence. I would suggest that this illusion is not going over well. It inevitably results in lack of coherence in their arguments due to a condition that we call ideological myopia, better known as tunnel vision. Let me give you a couple of examples. After listening to 31 witnesses give testimony in committee over a period of 80 hours, Senator Gold, in his speech on the report stage of this bill, was unable to recall any evidence which challenged the government's position on the bill. Instead, he said, "I will be voting against this report because, as I understand the rules and principles governing my constitutional duty as a senator, it would be inappropriate to accept a report that tears apart a government bill, which follows through on the electoral promises that was supported by credible evidence presented in committee." Colleagues, this is nonsense. Was there testimony at committee supporting the government's position? Yes. Was there evidence supporting the government's position? No, none. The absence of such evidence was repeatedly drawn to the attention of the committee by expert witnesses and sports shooting enthusiasts. They pleaded with us to get past the emotional smokescreen and realize that this bill is entirely aspirational and is not supported by any clear statistical or even anecdotal evidence. It is a patchwork of feel-good promises, which ISC senators think the country is supposed to roll over and simply accept because the government won an election. I beg to differ. Ridiculous promises, such as the budget will balance itself, or cracking down on law-abiding gun owners will reduce crime, should be called out by this chamber and not endorsed. Let me give you another example of tunnel vision at work. Last week, an ISG senator stood in this chamber and said, "Guns exist for one purpose, despite being used properly or for illegal purposes, they kill." Let me repeat that. Guns exist for one purpose, despite being used properly or for illegal purposes, they kill. Colleagues, I could repeat it a third time, but it will still not make any sense. Guns exist only to kill? Has the senator never heard of the Olympics? Does she not know that there is an event called shooting? Is she unaware that the shooting sport refers to the shooting of guns? Is the assertion that guns are only for killing a common understanding of some senators? Have the ISG senators never heard of the Shooting Federation of Canada or the International Shooting Sport Federation? What about skeet shooting or trap shooting? Are all of these considered killing? Right outside these doors are members of the Parliamentary Protective Service who would and have put their lives at risk to protect yours and mine. I do not think it's appropriate to accuse them of wearing a firearm simply for killing. What about the tens of thousands of Canadians who enjoy going to a gun range on the weekend to enjoy target shooting? Is the firearm they own simply for killing? Is that why they saved their hard-earned after-tax dollars so they could buy a weapon whose only purpose is for killing? What about all the other 2.1 million Canadians who have a gun license? Are they all killers in waiting? The absurdity of such comments is really beyond comprehension. And then the senators try to portray the illusion that they're opposing the committee's report on Bill C-71 because of some ideological purity and unassailable commitment to democracy. I look forward to seeing if the ISG's robust deference to an electoral mandate continues this fall when Andrew Scheer becomes the Prime Minister. I suspect that their aversion to such a scenario will have them topping up their donations to the Liberal Party quite promptly. Colleagues, there is no doubt in my mind that every member of this chamber wants to do whatever is necessary to reduce firearms violence. But what the Committee on National Security and Defense had to grapple with was whether this bill would actually accomplish that objective. The majority concluded that it would do no such thing. Our amendments attempted to correct that and salvage what we could from a very flawed bill. I am disappointed that after all the committee's time and effort, The government sponsor of this bill, Senator Pratt, has now rallied his Liberal colleagues to try and kill the committee's report simply because it didn't endorse his viewpoint. He, like all members of the committee, had the opportunity to make his case. He now wants to reject the committee's work, even while thanking the committee for it. I understand that as the sponsor of the bill, Senator Pratt feels some pressure to deliver for the government. But I would be remiss if I did not also point out that by rejecting the committee's report, he is jeopardizing the legislative timelines agreed upon by Senate leadership. Bill C-71 is to go to third reading by May 9, but that date is contingent upon the report being accepted by this chamber. If Senator Pratt wants to derail an entire agreement because he didn't get his way, I would strongly suggest that he consult with his leaders, Senator Harder and Senator Wu, before doing so. In my view, the legislation still fails in its bid to increase public safety and continues to needlessly penalize firearms owners.
Sorry for interrupting you, Senator, but your time has expired. Are you asking for more time?
20 seconds.
Leave granted, honourable senators. Agreed.
However, the amendments made by the committee do provide some measure of improvement, and the report should be adopted by this chamber. This, of course, does not prevent additional amendments from being put forward at third reading, as is the right of all senators to do. My limited time at report stage prevents me from discussing the importance of the amendments we made to this bill. So I encourage all senators to read the transcript of clause by clause. Colleagues, I believe that the report of the Committee on Bill C-71 should be adopted, as is the normal practice of this chamber, and I encourage you to vote in favor of its adoption.